When I first built websites in 1994, HTML tables were pretty much the only way you could lay things out in a predictable way. But of course, then again, the browsers we were using then were they were fixed size, so like 320 pixels wide. Fast forward 30 years to 2024, HTML tables are still in existence. They're still needed. They still play a role. But with the broad array of devices and viewports, HTML tables, as useful as they may be, they aren't innately mobile friendly, mobile responsive. Now, this video, this little presentation is going to show you a way that I found to make responsive HTML tables with just a few lines of CSS code. No JavaScript, no nothing. Now, I should point out that I'm not the only person who has done this, and a hat tip is I should give a hat tip to Kevin Powell, who back in 2023 did this video that you're seeing on the right-hand side, and I found it recently after I started writing the script for this particular video. I found it, and I realized I must have seen it a year ago because I subliminally or somehow incorporated lots of what Kevin is talking about. Now, maybe, great minds travel in the same channels, but I need to give Kevin credit. And I will put a link in the description to Kevin's video so you can watch that. But this is my presentation of how to do things. So here's a simple HTML table. It's events with cost and access, whether it's public or private, start date and an end date. Now, what you can see here is the basic HTML. Several rows, and you'll see that I've given a class to each of the table cells: event, cost, access, start date, and end date. And I also gave a data label, a data attribute to each one, which essentially is the same as the class name, except it's pretty. It's in proper case so that it can be displayed in a different way. Now, you may be wondering, why do I need data labels for these when I have classes? And I will show you that very soon. So what I figured out is that this simple dummy table, it looks okay at 800 pixels wide. If I go down to 600, it's kind of getting squashed. If I get down to 500, it's really squashed. And if I get down to what an old iPhone 5 is, which is 320 pixels wide, it's pretty much useless. You have to scroll like this. So, what to do? Here is the CSS file, the style sheet. And I have some basic rules that really aren't very special, and they are not related to responsiveness. So the body, I have a margin in line, a background color, table, margin in line auto, width of auto, border collapse. The responsive CSS rules are down here. And I'm going to essentially unveil them one at a time to show you the way I thought of creating this particular responsive style sheet for this HTML table. Now, I'm using the mobile last or desktop first approach. It really, obviously, the rules could apply just as easily if we took a mobile first approach. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to uncomment this. And the first rule is to make all the table cells and table rows display block. And this, of course, is at under 500. So let me go here to, let me make this be 500 pixels. Okay. So now what you see, let me go up to 501. That's at 501. This is at 500. We're getting there. So now essentially each row in this table becomes a series of rows and cells here. What's the next thing we have to do? Well, let's lose the borders. Okay, that looks a little better. We're getting there. However, these T8s, the T head labels, we don't need these anymore. They're just confusing. So let's get rid of those. I uncommented that, and let's resave. Good. We got rid of the table head cells. Now I want to make the table head, the title, stand out. File, save. Okay, made it bold. That works. Okay, we got the bold event titles now, but now let's add some spacing. So here I want to add a margin block of 1 rem and 5 rem. Let's uncomment this. File, save. Okay, so it's 1 rem on the top and 5 rem on the bottom. That's looking better still. The next thing to do is to give some additional information to what those items underneath each event title are. Now it's obviously pretty clear that that's the cost, that's the access, and we have a date, and it's probably start date and end date, but let's not leave anything to the imagination. Let's actually add that in. And this is why I use the data labels in the HTML. Here you can see for each of the rows, the cost has a data label of cost, access, data label of access, start date and end date, etc. So now let's go back to the CSS, and I'm going to uncomment this section right here. I'm going to save, and here's what we get. Those values of the data labels for each of the table cells is now displayed, and I put it in red just to make it stand out. Now let's take a look at that code. I'm using the before pseudo element. In each case, the start date, end date class, the td.access, td.cost, before. I'm using the before pseudo element. In each case, the content is using the value of the data label attribute. So it's the ATTR data label followed by a colon and a space. I make them italic and I made it red. Now we're almost there. I don't love that these, even with the space between the data attribute label and the value, it doesn't look great. So I've got one more set of rules to uncomment. And let's see what that is. Again, it's the start date, end date, access, and cost cells. I'm turning them into display grid and using a grid template columns declaration of 15 characters, 15 CH and 1 FR, and I do file save, and now we have that kind of spacing. Now, I think that's a significant improvement over the basic table that isn't responsive. I'm going to add another pixel here, and we're back to the desktop or laptop version. This is a second version of the responsive tables HTML. It's a responsive tables -02.html, and there's not much different, but let me show you. If I bring this down to 500, I'm using green instead of red just so it stands out. The only thing you can see that I've added visually is a border line under each row, essentially each table row. But there's also an HTML change. Let me show you. In each case, what I've done for each cell is I've added the class of useLabel. So, well, except for event, but TD class equals useLabel, cost, useLabel access, useLabel start date. Now, this is a utility class. Why did I do that? Let's run over to the CSS. And now what you can see is instead of having this whole block of multiple selectors, td.startDate, td.endDate, td.access, I can use the utility class as I have here, and now I'm using td.useLabel : before, which again is the pseudo element, and again to display it as a grid, td.useLabel display grid and grid template columns 15 CH and 1 FR. So that's now the number of lines. If we look at this, the number of declarations are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it's 12 lines of declarations that turns this table, which could have hundreds of rows and not just a dozen or so, into a responsive display. And some of these obviously making the font style for the label italic isn't necessary, but I think that's a pretty good way to go responsive with HTML tables. Look forward to hearing your comments. If you have better ways to do things, I welcome hearing from you. Thanks for watching and listening.